Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Welcome back, and my special guest tonight is Barbara Hand Clow, and she is an internationally recognized Mayan elder, ceremonial teacher, and Cherokee record keeper. She is the author of over 10 books, including The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration and Awakening of the World Mind, which is one of my favorite books of all times, Awakening the Planetary Mind, Beyond the Trauma of the Past to a New Era of Creativity, and The Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. She was the acquisition editor for Bear & Company, publishing from 1983 to 2000, and her website is handcloud2012.com, and it's linked up at the drjohnradiosite.com under her name. And I'd like to read a quote about her book from Whitley Strieber. Barbara Hand Clow has written the definitive book about 2012. This book, quite simply, is the best resource that now exists. A very wise human being has poured her heart, her soul, and her mind into these words. The Mayan Code is a great gift to all of us, and I agree with Whitley. So I'd like to welcome my good friend, Barbara Hand Clow, to the program. Hello, Barbara, and thanks a million for being with us tonight.
Hello, John, and thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I've been real excited to have you on. I don't want this to get to your head, but after Dan Brown, you may be my next favorite author.
That'll go to my head. Wouldn't we all like to have sales like that?
Yeah, I know. But maybe a good place to start. I know you'll be with us for an hour, and I really appreciate the time. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your Native American background, which always interests me? I know your grandfather was a big influence in your life.
Yeah, my grandfather really was my teacher, as well as my grandfather. And Grandpa Hand was half Cherokee and half Scottish. And he was a record keeper, which means he had been brought, the wisdom of through time from the tribes have been brought through him. And then he trained me as his initiate. And this is an interesting thing that goes on in Cherokee tradition, because usually the teachings pass from a male teacher to a female teacher, and then a female teacher to a male teacher. And so in this case, my grandfather selected me as his granddaughter. But what is even more interesting to me is he passed it through his 5 children. And the reason he did that is that he did not feel that his 5 children, one of whom is my father, would be alive at this point in time, 2012. And of course, that's absolutely true. So he chose his granddaughter as his legacy, and that's the reason that I've brought this teaching to the planet.
Almost like he had the prophecy. He knew that was going to happen, and that's why he selected you. That's interesting. And what you're considered a Cherokee record keeper. Could you tell us what that is?
This means there are different traditions. There are medicine traditions where people teach ceremonial teachings, and of course I know how to do ceremony, but I'm not a ceremonial teacher for other people. And then we have herbal traditions, we have healing traditions, we have the full range of teachings within the Cherokee tradition, and the record keepers are the ones who carry the long records of time. And the records of time that we're working with actually go back at least 100,000 years. And it's been really interesting in this lifetime to gradually kind of put together a bunch of fragments that I received. The information that I received for the last 10 or 12,000 years was quite complete. But the information back like 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago was not that complete. And one of the big adventures in this lifetime, especially working with Dr. Johan Kalaman, whom you had on the show a few weeks ago, has given me the chance to really recover that 100,000-year time data bank, which I think is extremely important to us right now, because I think we're only waking up at this point in time to levels of past wisdom pretty much 12,000 years ago and earlier. And I think the recovery of this early wisdom, which some people think of as Atlantis, or many different names we could give to this level of consciousness and wisdom. And it is not a stretch to say that the planet is in very big trouble right now. And I think that the recovery of the ancient way of working with the planet and working with perceiving reality is already becoming increasingly important, and therefore any information that we have about the deep past is very important to us at this time.
Is there any specific information that would be good to share? I know in your book you have a lot of it, but would be good for the listeners to know. I know there's a lot of stress and anxiety about 2012, and so I'm wondering if some of that information is really related to our time now.
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's the thing that I'm struggling with the most. And as a matter of fact, I was writing an article today that was directed right to that issue. So I do have some thoughts on that. And I think these thoughts are actually quite important. Now, as you know from interviewing Dr. Kalaman and reading his books and then reading the Mayan Code, as you know, Carl and I are working with a system of evolution over 16.4 billion years, which has been accelerating, especially during the last 300 years, and especially this last year. And as you know, as far as we can see, this particular part of our evolutionary process completed itself October 28th, 2011. And so the big question is, well, where are we now? And I have come to the conclusion that we are moving into what I call a still point. In other words, this evolutionary time acceleration pressure has completed itself, and we seem to be moving into it's very hard to explain what a still point is. It's like if you think of a pond, and you think of the very center of a series of waves where there's no motion and everything is extremely still. And I think this is very confusing for people. I know it's very confusing for me. I'm so used to the, kind of like trotting along in a horse and keep moving. I'm so used to that it feels very strange to have that energy go away.
I like the example of the pond. Could the still point be related to what people talk about the zero energy or the universal life force or something that's just basic in nature that's pervading all matter?
Yeah, and I was lucky enough. My husband is a craniosacral therapist, which means he's working with manipulating the cranium and sacrum in order to work with energy. And he's in the middle of a 2-year course. He's already a trained therapist, but he's taking more training because the field is advancing so fast that even though he had this particular course 10 years ago, he actually is taking it again. And so I got to hang out with him for 5 or 6 days while he was taking this course, and I finally got in touch with what he was really doing. Now he's been doing this for 15 years, and I can assure you that I'm the kind of person who really pays attention to whether I understand what's going on around me. But as a result of him being in the course this time, I feel that I finally comprehend that still point. And what it is that we have these tides of energy flowing in the body that some craniosacral therapists call liquid light. And I actually wrote a book back in 1991 called Liquid Light of Sex. I actually started writing about this issue a long time ago. But I only can understand it now. And when we attain a still point and when we reach that, which Carl Kalaman would say is enlightenment, then what happens, as far as I can tell, is multidimensional consciousness is fully available to us. When we're in that state of consciousness, we literally can reach any dimension of awareness. And in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, which first came out in 2004, and then I revised it in 2010, I said that when we got to the end of the Mayan calendar, October 28, 2011, that 9 dimensions of consciousness would become available to human beings. And as far as I can see, that's what's going on now. But it's so new and so confusing. And actually, it's actually very old, because as far as I can tell, when I go back into ancient people, Paleolithic people, say 15,000 years ago, as far as I can tell, they were conscious on all those levels. You know, they weren't scientifically complex the way we are. Like one in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, the fourth dimension of consciousness is quantum mechanics. They didn't understand quantum mechanics the way we do in the current moment. But people like Laird Scranton have demonstrated that the ancient Egyptians understood quantum mechanics 5,000 years ago. So we're just reattaining this very, very high knowledge. And it really is confusing for people.
Is that why this opening of the 9 dimensions is why people are experiencing a spiritual awakening? I mean, the more people I talk to, even myself, there is a spiritual quickening that's been happening in the last couple of years, and it seems like realms are opening up. So is that why, do you think, people are able to is the veil becoming less, or is it just because of the acceleration of time that these dimensions are opening up?
Yeah, I think the acceleration of time, by completing itself, opened these gateways up again. And as I said, many of these levels were open to us before. But one thing that I find distinctly different in the current moment, and let's see if you resonate with this, I'm noticing with people and with myself that all I have to do now is just turn away from negativity. Whenever there's anything that's going on that's negative, like some horrible event in the news or some sort of difficulty. Now, if it's something I have to cope with, of course I cope with it. Mm-hmm. But basically, I just keep steering myself kind of like going down a white water rafting stream. I just keep moving away from the negativity, and I keep reaching out for a creative potential, whatever it happens to be, and I just start creating right there. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, my God.
We seem to be navigating reality in a very, very new way, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, in fact, I don't like to even listen to the news anymore, and all my reading is spiritually and, metaphysically related to. And I agree. It's just a natural thing, and I think that does explain too why people seem to be more spiritual attuned. One thing, if you could explain, I know we mentioned this before, that in a lot of this information that you received, science has just validated the information you got, like string theory and the dimensions. And I think that's important because everybody all over the place is making predictions. What makes predictions valid is when they come true. And you've got a pretty good track record of making predictions and then having science validate those. I don't know if you want to give an example.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's not predictions about who's going to win which war or any of those kinds of things, It's predictions.
Barbara, I was hoping it was the lottery, so you tell me the numbers and I can win some money,
Yeah, but people think of predictions and prophecy that way, and
right.
mine have more been about. First of all, I believe that we are waking up now, and we're moving into a very, very high state of spiritual consciousness. And the reason that I believe that is because that information came through me in various things that I've written, and then, as you've said, then when I said something was going to happen, it's actually happening. But more specifically, I've been really working on the timing of the unfoldment. Because if we can see that there is a process that's been going on step by step, then that gives us a tremendous amount of confidence that we are actually headed in a direction that's going to have a very, very positive outcome. And so 20 years ago, in the Pleiadian Agenda and then in various books I've written after that, I said that string theory would be validated at the end of the Mayan calendar. And lo and behold, this is the main reason I really think that Carl Kalaman has the timing right. According to Kalaman, the Mayan calendar ended October 28, 2011. And then in early 2012, about within 10 days after the calendar completed itself, the Higgs boson was discovered in the particle accelerator in Europe. And also the mathematical computations that establish how string theory works were accomplished in early December by a group of mathematicians in Japan. And so it literally occurred 10 days after the calendar ended. And string theory is the actual proof and utilization of string theory is of critical importance to us at this time. And it's very, very simple to explain what that is. Just go back to the issue of quantum mechanics, which was discovered in the beginning of the last century, and then go into the 1940s and 1950s and look at all of the gadgets and devices and technologies that have been created based on quantum physics, such as telephones and computers and so on and so forth. And then imagine living in a world that is based on the science, based on string theory. Because what will happen with that is that we will no longer have problems with space and time orientation at all. There's all kinds of things that could happen for us if science starts basing technology on string theory. Basically, we would be living in a world where our technology was based on multidimensional consciousness.
You know, I'm really glad to hear that, because my interest as a physicist has been string theory. In fact, I've been developing some lectures for the general public. Maybe I'll do a show on string theory and maybe try to get a guest. But that to me was,
and
really fascinating.
you are a physicist, John?
Yeah.
Are you a physicist? Oh, that's really interesting to me, because one of the things that's been very frustrating, probably one of the few things that's been really frustrating in my career, is that I just wish that more scientists would pay attention, particularly to alchemy of 9 dimensions. Because what alchemy of 9 dimensions does is it describes all 9 dimensions, and then it posits that there is a science for each dimension. And quantum mechanics is the science of the 4th dimension. Newtonian physics is the science of the 3rd dimension that we inhabit. And
well,
so,
when you mentioned that to me, I did order the book. I got your other book, so I can't wait to read that one. So.
Yeah. Well, it's just been frustrating me because where all this material, that particular part of my work, that all comes from channeling the Pleiadian agenda. Mm-hmm. And the Pleiadian agenda was a literal download from the Pleiades that came in the fall of 1994 and then the spring of 1995. And what I did was I did 18 channeled sessions, and then I had them tape recorded. And then I had the sessions downloaded into my computer, and then I made them into a book called the Pleiadian Agenda. The only problem is I didn't understand my own book. I only understood half of it. Because the first 4 or 5 dimensions were made sense to me, but the higher dimensions I did not understand at the time. And so all that information comes from that download, and then what I've been doing for the last 20 years is analyzing it scientifically, teaching it, and attempting to comprehend it.
And that's what the alchemy of the 9 dimensions, that will explain it, I assume, and have the science involved.
Oh yeah, it's all in there. But another interesting example I can give you is while that material was coming in, I was the acquisitions editor at Barron Company, and I got 4 proposals in the spring of 1995 and the summer of 1995 that were the same book as the data bank that I brought in. One of these was a finished manuscript, which made me feel really bad because mine was already an editorial. And then 2 of them were very complex outlines, and one of them was a phone conversation. And we're not talking about people calling up regarding love and light and New Age joy and all this kind of stuff. We're talking about extremely specific material and an extremely specific cosmology involving the Pleiades and Orion and the what's our twin galaxy, the Andromeda galaxy, and the Orion star system. And since I just was working in one small company, I kind of have to assume that a whole lot of those manuscripts were floating around out there, if you see what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
And this came in during the time that Edward Witten was doing his gauge calculations for superstring theory. So a bunch of people seem to have downloaded an information data bank that is basically is the basis of string theory.
You know, I was wondering why I was getting interested in the Mayan calendars and all this different aspects. And with my interest in string theory, you may have solved something for me. In fact, right in front of me here, I have a signed picture from Ed Witten, a poster when he gave a talk at USC this year, because he's been my idol, because he really is the brains behind string theory, him and Brian Greene and Michio Kaku. But you may have solved something for me. I'm trying to see how this all comes together. And since I'm a physicist, I'm interested in the paranormal, the psychic, the Mayan. Maybe I'd maybe be able to put something together. Yeah. So you gave me a new project, Barbara, like usual. Huh?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, you know, even if we get the math and even if we develop the technology, which I hope we will, what Alchemy of 9 Dimensions does, and some of these other writers were doing, is we're showing what kind of consciousness is in each dimension. We're filling that out, and that ultimately should give a lot of scientists a lot of cues about how to work with these dimensions, I would think. You know, what forms of consciousness inhabit each one.
Well, what I love what you said is that for string theory to work, you have to have many more dimensions, 10, 11, some even postulate the 26. So the whole idea, the idea of other dimensions is very scientifically. It's not a metaphysical, construct. And that's what's
right.
exciting. Could you tell us a little bit about the Pleiades? Because when people, you mentioned you channel the Pleiades, like who are they, where are they located, and do they talk to many people or only a select few? How do they decide who to communicate with?
Well, we seem to be living during a period when there's kind of a Pleiadian renaissance going on. I'm thinking of writers like Barbara Marciniak, for example, and my work. And if you look at this question anthropologically, what you'll find is there's evidence for people reporting contact with the Pleiades going back around 40,000 years, and this is based on the research of an anthropologist, Richard Rudgley. And so, as far as we know, the idea and belief that we're in touch with the Pleiades and that they have an influence on us is a very, very old idea. And then if you go back like 5,000 years ago and you look at the goddess Athena, who was from the Pleiades, or the goddess Neith in Egypt, you find the issue of Pleiadian deities all over the place. And the basic situation with the Pleiades is that this particular influence tends to be very loving and extremely concerned about our species. Very loving, especially toward children, and they have some wonderful and profound teachings about how we should be living our lives. And I may write those down someday. That's a whole data bank there. In other words, like the Pleiadian keys to healthy living or something like that. I just haven't gotten around to that one yet, but I may do that because their wisdom is truly profound and very sensible.
So they're really there to help us then, basically, to guide us and
yeah, they're definitely guides, and some people see them, some people hear them, some people feel them. People pick up on their influence. And in my system, Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, they are in the 5th dimension. And in my system, the 5th dimension is the opening of the heart.
They're not the ones that are causing the abductions and the cattle mutilation. Those are different aliens, right? Different.
Most people report that those beings are from Zeta Reticuli. You've probably heard that. And I think there's all kinds of issues about where those beings are coming from. But they aren't, as far as I know, it's not a Pleiadian issue, as far as I know.
So there are many different types of extraterrestrials, some friendly and some not so friendly, and maybe some neutral, I guess. Yes. So people shouldn't be so excited if they make extra. You better find out, what are your motives, right?
Well, when you open yourself up to the possibility of 9 dimensions, and by the way, there's actually it's really 11. The 10th dimension is kind of like the vertical axis. Then the 11th is the container, and it actually fits with string theory remarkably well. But when you get into this issue of the other dimensions, the material that I brought in is showing that each one of these dimensions exists in a particular location in a particular star system. And then there are intelligences and beings who inhabit that dimension. So for some people, opening themselves up to the possibility of 9 dimensions and tuning into these other levels could initially be fairly scary for them, if you think of it.
One thing I'm sure the listeners are asking themselves, and I probably am too, is can you give any suggestions, practical suggestions, how a spiritual seeker could open up to these other dimensions, and maybe for communications for the Pleiades? Are there any, techniques or types of meditations that would help us?
Well, obviously, there are many teachers teaching how to do that, and the value of Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, which is just my piece of it, is that some people have come to my workshops and have mentioned that they love Alchemy of 9 Dimensions because it's like a coat hanger you can put in the hall, and you can hang all the esoteric systems on it. There's there's one for each dimension, and so what alchemy, the gift coming from alchemy, is alchemy shows us how to be in our bodies, be grounded, be totally connected with the intelligence of Earth, and then how to reach into these other levels. So, so my particular gift would be in teaching about being profoundly grounded whenever we go anyplace else, because this is where we live. We live in the 3rd dimension, which is linear space and time. And we must never lose our sense of where we are in this dimension, and yet we have the ability to be profoundly located here and travel into many, many realms if we choose it.
You know, you'll be getting copies of my book, but my whole technique of Enochian magic is basically the technique of opening up into other realms and dimensions and contacting the angelic, presence. And I think these are all different applications of almost the same thing, and this is why I'm thinking why this whole spiritual atmosphere is really accelerating. People are opening up. People are more conducive to meditation or whatever. I guess like anything, Barbara, I always say there's many paths, many ways people can contact the God within them, and it's the idea is to making that effort, right? Like you say, turn away from the negative and the noise and kind of do things that bring you towards the light, whether it's reading, meditation, or whatever.
Yeah. And I can't wait till those books come, because you haven't read Alchemy of Nine Dimensions yet, but each dimension has a keeper, and this is an old Native tradition. In fact, when that material came in, I had to go to my Cherokee spiritual brother to ask him whether I could reveal that information, because we had been taught to never reveal the keepers. And because this information had come through me in the way that it did, that it was possible to open that up. And so what you'll find in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, John, is the keeper of the ninth dimension is the Enochians.
Oh my God, really? Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
It's funny, since we've been in contact, we find we have a lot in common, but I think that's the importance of multidisciplinary approach in any kind of research. You get different experts in different areas all putting their heads together to solve the picture. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of that these days. Everyone seems to be off on their own individual path. But, we're coming up to our top of the hour break. When we come back, I would love to discuss the chapter, which is one of my favorite chapters of all your books, The Mayan Code, is Chapter 8, Christ in the Cosmos. I just find it an incredible mixture of information. And so, Barbara, just hang on. We'll be taking a 2-minute break, and we'll be right back with Barbara Hand-Clow. And this is Mysterious Realms with Dr. John, so please stay tuned.
Is it possible to read a person's thoughts? Can we implant thoughts also? Is there evidence of the existence of God? Does USGS records show increases in earthquakes due to nuclear testing? Author Jose Collazo says yes, and he has the proof in his 3 books titled America's New Slavery, fMRI Technology, America's New Slavery Behind the Scenes and Update, God Does Exist, No More Nuclear Testing, and much more. Researched under the Freedom of Information Act and other sources, Jose Collazo has the proof to most of his claims and is investigating others. You can get copies of his books on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or www.xlibris.com. That's www.xlibris.com. Or you can click the book banner on the main page right next to the chat room on www.latenightinthe.midlands.com. Get your copy now. Are you looking for ways to get your business or website noticed? In these tough times, are you looking for ways to increase sales? Well, you're in luck. Late Night in the Midlands is a great way to get your message to the masses without spending all your hard-earned dollars. We offer affordable packages for on-air runs and make it easy for you to purchase ad space on the website. If it is just a banner ad placement you're looking for, go to www.latenightinthe.midlands.com, and on the right-hand side under the player, you will see your options. Select your option and email your banner to us at latenightinthe.midlands@yahoo.com, and we can have you being seen by thousands upon thousands around the world who visit the Late Night in the Midlands website. Or, if it's an on-air run you're interested in, then contact me at latenightinthe.midlands@yahoo.com, and let's work out a deal you can afford and start letting us help you be noticed.
Mysterious Realms Radio with Dr. John DeSalvo. You can call in with your questions at 858-683-1309. This number is also posted at our radio website, which is drjohnradio.com. At this site, you can see our upcoming guest schedule, information about our guests, and download past programs for free. Now back to Mysterious Realms with Dr. John.
Welcome back. We're talking with Barbara Hand-Clow, internationally recognized Mayan elder, ceremonial teacher, and Cherokee record keeper. And Barbara, before we get into this chapter, I just wanted to tell you a brief, short experience I had regarding, I think, related to your chapter. And people that know me and my books know I never try to push my views or beliefs, and I believe everyone has God within them and can find it in their unique way. But many years ago, when I was involved in a lot of different kind of strange occult and things, I felt attacked by a lot of negativity, evil coming in, and I learned like 100 names of God to repel the evil, and none of them seemed to work. And I wasn't really a Christian at that time for any reason, but I decided to just use the name of Jesus, and all the evil dissipated. And the idea is that there's power in the name of Jesus. What it is, I don't know. I think he was a unique person. I don't like usually Christian terms like Son of God, but I like Cosmic Christ or whatever. But your way, what you talk about, I find very touching and very important. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Boy, it's really hard to talk about Jesus, but I'll go for it.
Great, thank you.
In Chapter 8, which you, because you told me that you liked it, I reviewed it. And really what happened in Chapter 8 was an attempt on my part to put together into kind of a weaving some extremely complex thoughts. And one of those was the issue of who Jesus was. And one of the most interesting pieces of information that I put in Chapter 8 was the issue of gematria, which is using letters and words as numbers, and I think you're probably familiar with that. I don't know if that's part of Enochian
Bible
magic
study, yeah.
or not. Yeah, and what you find when you work with Jesus' name, and that is the Aramaic forms and all that, which I won't do on the radio because it's fairly complicated. What the gematria shows is that he seems to be a being who pierced all of the levels of the universe and brought them to our planet. And this, of course, was only 2,000 years ago. And if this is true, then we are only just at this point beginning to even comprehend what's going on here. The first thing that happened, of course, as we know historically, is the church attempted to take advantage of this great power and leash it into their own systems, the Catholic Church at the time, and to use the energy for their own ends, which is typical human behavior. And that lock on who Christ was and what Christ means to us, what Jesus means to us, seems to be breaking up now. To me, it may be the very best thing that's going on regarding the end of the cycles of the Mayan calendar and the ending of the various issues that have been developed, especially over the last 5,000 years in this case. So I think we're in a very interesting phase right now where there's going to be a completely new understanding of who this being is in relationship to us. And you know where we're going to find it? We're going to find it right within ourselves.
Yeah,
because the access to this energy is the heart. And probably for you, once you found the way to the heart, that's probably what dissipated the negative influences that were trying to block you. And these things are really real. I mean, for anybody who's had any experience with any of these dudes, it's not a picnic to deal with these kinds of forces.
No, it's true. You know, it's interesting because Dr. J.J. Hertek, who's been one of my closest friends for many years, views Jesus as a cosmic Christ, a really interesting way. What I like about it is it seems there's always been an antithesis between the New Age and the Christians. The Christians tend to look at all New Age as evil, and the New Age people don't like the Christians. And the problem is they can go hand in hand. I mean, there's a place for everything, and I just think that people need to meditate and follow their own path, whatever it leads them. So I just, like to bring that up because certain things are important in people's lives, and I think whatever way you find God within you, it's important. Like you said, it has to be within you. So.
And when I say breaking up, when I say these systems are breaking up, what I mean is the negative, power-ridden, controlling aspects of these systems. Like right now, I'm writing a novel about priestly sexual abuse, and I'm really delving into some of these control patterns, because I think we've reached the point where people are capable, and this would be any Christian, Protestant, Catholic, I don't care who it is. Anybody within any religious system has the capacity within themselves to access much more clear forms of these teachings and energy than we have been given historically by the various religious systems that we're dealing with. They've really failed us. And we're coming to a point now where we are insisting on being spiritual, and we're insisting on being in touch with high forms of consciousness, and we're not going to allow these kinds of systems to block us anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's good, and I think it's a way that, like I always said, we're all, when people ask me kind of what I believe, I said, well, I really don't know what I believe, because I don't think anybody really knows, but I always say I believe that there is a God, and God is in all of us, and we'll all eventually kind of go back to God, and I believe our consciousness will always be separated, and I always felt there was that Jesus was special in whatever way you can describe it. And so, but the rest is, a lot of it is just footnotes upon footnotes, and the idea is finding our way back to God. I want to maybe switch gears a second here, because there's just so much to talk to you about. One of the interests I have, and I never realized this, in your book I guess you mentioned, I didn't know if this was true, that the Earth just first tilted on its axis about 11,000 years ago. I thought, it was tilted since its formation. That was kind of something I didn't expect.
Yeah, that's a hypothesis, obviously, and it's a position that has actually been held for quite a while in avant-garde sources in science. So if you go back into Greek astronomical sources, and you go back to maybe even 3,000 years ago, you'll find evidence that people felt that the Earth's axis tilted fairly recently. So that's just the historical part of it. But I've been much more interested in the astrophysics issue, because let's say we have a planet, and we have a solar system, and we have all these orbits, and Uranus is tilted one way and Neptune's tilted another way. All of the planets have anomalies that show evidence of fairly serious disturbances in their history. And so the only way that you could really prove this is true is if you worked with astrophysical models based on how the solar system is now, and then progress them backward to see where they might have been a long time ago. And people are working on that. That's not my field. A really, really great book came out in the 1970s called The Saturn Myth by a researcher named David Talbot. And unfortunately, that book, you just can't get that book. It's a real gem. It costs a lot on Amazon to buy that book. But Talbot did take a real stab at what the solar system was probably like before the cataclysms. Now, the cataclysms are described in detail in most of my work, in particular Awakening the Planetary Mind, where I'm focusing on a great big cataclysm that happened about 12,000 years ago. And the reason that I'm focusing on the cataclysm is, first of all, when I was a child, my grandfather, it's the Cherokee story. You'll find the story of this cataclysm in almost all ancient cultures. And the reason it's important is because people don't know about it, and they don't realize why we regressed. And in order to get in touch with the fact that we were once more highly evolved, we've got to have a reason for why we're not as highly evolved in the current moment. And it's the series of cataclysms. So I'm trying to think, what was your question? I lost my train of thought.
It tied in, because I was wondering if the tilt of the Earth is what caused the cataclysms, and it took us from like kind of a paradise state into a more, kind of catastrophic state, basically.
Right. Yeah, now I lost my train of thought, but that's what we find in the stories of ancient cultures, including Greek and Egyptian and all those cultures too. And so the point would be that that something did happen with axial tilt at that time. And most importantly, I think we should realize that our solar system hasn't been this way for millions and millions of years. That doesn't, if you think about it, that doesn't make any sense. You know, astronomers may want to make it look that way. It's very funny, actually, when you watch what goes on with astronomy, because astronomers will put out a telescope like Hubble, and then all of a sudden they'll see a whole bunch of things. Maybe they'll see a bunch of asteroids or whatever they pick up on. And then they tend to think that something new is going on, when in reality they probably are simply seeing something that's been going on for a long time and they couldn't see it before. And the same kind of mentality applies to the situation with the solar system itself. And so when you start to get into the issue of the enormous event that this cataclysm was, it almost destroyed the planet. I also believe, and some other researchers also believe, that there was a civilization on Mars that was destroyed during this cataclysm. And the reason we think that, based on the work of Richard Hoagland and different researchers, is that the monuments on Mars and the megalithic remains on Mars look like they're about 10,000 years old in terms of some of the things we see on the surface of our planet. So it's not just about Earth, it's actually about the whole solar system. My grandfather believed that we wouldn't really be able to get back to our normal level of consciousness, which is 9-dimensional, until we understand what happened to us and remember our story. You know, and basically the basic idea would be that we're a multi-traumatized species that's only waking up now.
And that's your role, basically, to bring this information out, to help us.
Yeah.
Because that's why you, in a sense, you're tying in the whole story. That's why you're the record keeper, that your grandfather realized that you were going to be around at this time when it was needed, and to give you the information. And again, like I said, I felt your book's one of the most important books I've ever read. And one question that kind of ties into this, and may sound a little off base, why is the Vatican so interested in astronomy? You know, they have their own observatory in Rome. They rent time, I think, from the University of Arizona and SETI scopes. Is it just purely academic? Are they looking for something, or do they know something that they're not telling us?
Oh boy, you're getting into a hot one, because it's part of the whole issue of the Vatican conspiracy, which is a very, very real thing. One of the deepest portals and sources in the global elite conspiracies on the planet is all involved with the Vatican. And
really?
if you think about, definitely. How about Vatican banking? I mean, after all, what ultimately affects us the most in our reality? Sure. Economics, you know, and the Vatican Bank has a tremendous amount of influence in world finance, and also in as far as astronomy is concerned. It's getting into what they might actually know and not they're telling us is like a whole big data bank, because I think we're on the verge of discovering, possibly during 2012, that our sun is part of a binary system, and I'm just waiting for it. Because, number one, whenever they find another star out there that has planets, about 85 to 90% of the time they discover that it's binary. Are you following that? Like the
where would the other sun be, or twin?
Well, this is where it gets complicated from the point of view of astrophysics, because we're orbiting around the sun, and all the other planets are too. And then if it has a relationship with another star, this isn't my research. This is actually the research of Walter Cruttenden, who wrote a really wonderful book called The Lost Star of Myth and Time, which is a very important book. And he thinks that the way our binary system works is that the other body is not visible very much of the time. He thinks that astronomers cited it in the 16th century when they first invented telescopes. But what I'm getting at here, John, is I think we're moving into an amazing moment here, where we're going to start to really have a better I don't think we understand what goes on with the solar system at all. And very few people really understand how the solar system works in galactic orbit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, when you look at it, our technology in terms of astronomy and astrophysics, we think it's so advanced, but it's really primitive in terms of the cosmos, and the slice of time we're looking at, it's so small. And,
yeah, it's very, very primitive, and also designed to keep people in the dark. For example, this whole issue of global warming, which is definitely happening. The issue isn't whether global warming is happening. The issue is what's causing it. And so what do you do if you start to realize that we're in a binary system and we're moving into a phase where the planet's going to heat up? And by the way, all the planets in the solar system are heating up right now. It's not just the Earth. So what do you do with that information? Well, you come up with an economic system where you can sell carbon credits and you can create carbon credit millionaires, and people in the global elite, such as Al Gore, who want to be billionaires, can make a pile of money, if you follow my drift. So it's happening, but the question is, why is it happening? And this is what my grandfather was so strong on. He just kept saying, if people don't understand the story, and if they don't understand the past, and therefore what's going on in the current moment, they can't recover their natural intelligence.
Okay. Big question. We got about 2 minutes left.
In other words, we're stumped.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could have you on for 5 hours. A question. Why are we here? What's our purpose?
Oh, we're here to create from the heart. I mean, that's the amazing thing about this discovery of the still point, going right back to the beginning of the show. After watching my husband for 15 years in his work and all the other therapists and all this kind of stuff, I just couldn't figure out what they were doing. One thing I could see is they were addicted to it. Because if you're a craniosacral therapist, every time you have a client, you get to hang out in the still point. And so once I figured out what the still point was, which is access to the very basis of the biodynamic life force that we have, then you start to understand why we're here. We're here to manifest that force and that energy. Our bodies are structured to do it. Our consciousness is structured to do it. And as we're waking up, we're moving back into that point. And that's what Kalaman means when he talks about enlightenment at the end of the calendar.
So are we God's paintbrushes, basically, or creating and experiencing?
Well, this is an interesting idea because in Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, remember I told you that each dimension has a keeper.
Right.
The keeper is something that holds it in form. And the keepers of the third dimension are us. We literally come to Earth and we're born here in order to care for nature. And that's where we are in extreme deviance at this point.
Because we're really, in a sense, abusing nature and using it for selfish means instead of being true keepers. I was just curious because, to me, everything boils down to, is there a God and why am I here and what's going to happen? Well, maybe that's the other question, as a Cherokee record keeper and information. What happens when we die? Is there reincarnation? Do we go to another dimension?
Well, first of all, we know just from basic science and physics that nothing ever ceases to exist. Things just transform, so we know that.
Right.
And so then the question is, what do we transform into? And I think it depends upon where our curiosity and passion lies. Like, I've had an extremely strong historical bent in this lifetime. And so then, of course, I've gone back through hundreds of past lives because I'm fascinated by what I was doing before I came here this time. So I feel that reincarnation is a very real thing. But that doesn't mean it's real for a lot of people. There's not a lot of people who care about that, and nor do I think they necessarily should.
Curious. I'm hoping it doesn't exist. I don't want to come back again as a kid, learn how to walk, eat, go to school.
Yeah, but think about that. My mother used to argue with me. My mother said that the reason she couldn't stand the idea of reincarnation is she didn't want to come back again. And the problem with that is then, are you really fulfilling your role as the keeper of Earth? Because we literally come here to care for this place. And I actually think that losing touch with having been here before may be part of the reason we're not caring for this planet. In other words, if we really knew we were coming back again and again and again, we might look at this whole thing differently.
That's a good point. I think there's other ways to explain it, but it's an interesting speculation. Well, I really ask you simple questions. Huh? Is there a God? What is going to happen when we die? Let's see what else. But really, I mean, anyone who I think is a real spiritual seeker and meditates and thinks about these are the main questions. Everything else is trivial. My daughter was asking me the other day, what have I learned in 40 years of spiritual search? And I said, I probably know less now than when I knew in fourth grade. There's just so much information, and I just don't know. I mean, I basically say I believe there's a God, we're part of God, and we'll continue to exist after we die, but everything else is pure speculation, unfortunately, So, but it gives us hope, because I think what I like your message, and Carl Kalaman's message, is that your message is of spiritual hope. Maybe we're supposed to be keepers and we're not doing our job. Maybe things don't look that well. The Palladians are trying to get us in the right track, but there's hope. There's an awakening. People are starting to open up to this, and we're getting this intergalactic help. Is that a good way to look at it? I mean, it's not.
Well, yeah. And another way you can frame this question, you could say, well, why are we here? From another point of view. From a very, very high consciousness point of view, there's a lot of evidence in information that people pick up that our planet has actually been selected for a very, very special place in the universe itself. And that in order to come to the level that we need to come to be the beings that we need to be here, we've had to go through suffering and travail and difficult experiences in order to, the idea would be, John, that when we finally move into a sense of peace and into a sense of that still point, that probably nobody in the whole cosmos could appreciate it more than we do because of the pain that we've gone through here, if you see what I mean. In other words, I get information, so do other people, that we're being prepared to be teachers for the whole universe based on what's going on this planet. And that we're making a lot of big mistakes here in order to learn the consequences of our mistakes. And other people have said the same thing.
If somebody's really resonating with what you're saying, you have 10 books out. What first book would you recommend? I know it's an individual choice, but if you were going to say this is a good first book.
I think Alchemy of Nine Dimensions is the most important one.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
And can you give out your website again, too, so people, if they want to contact you or order any of your books?
Sure. It's Hand, H-A-N-D, Clow, C-L-O-W, 2012.com.
And you're also linked up at drjohnradio.com. Just click on Barbara's name. I can't end the show without asking you about one of my favorite authors, and who I found. You told me you actually worked with was Matthew Fox. I remember his book Original Blessing was just an incredible read. Could you tell us a little bit about your what I would say experience with Matthew Fox?
Yeah, sure. In 1982, I decided to go to graduate school. And I was in Chicago at the time, and Matthew Fox's master's program in theology was located at Mundelein Loyola. So I went to graduate school. I graduated from graduate school, and Matthew was basically tapping his best students. And so my husband was a publisher, at the time working for Rand McNally. You remember the Matt people, they also were publishers. And so Matthew tapped Jerry and me to take over his publishing company in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so we went down in 1983 to Santa Fe, and we were there for 17 years running Bear & Company. And now Bear & Company has been sold to Inner Traditions, as you know, because you're one of their authors. And so during that period, Matthew and I worked together in acquisitions for about the first 4 or 5 years. And then as soon as he felt I was adequately trained, then he withdrew in order to do other things, and I took over that part of the company. So he's a good friend and a great colleague, a wonderful person, as you know from having read him yourself.
Well, maybe someday I can send you his book and you can get him to sign it for me. I don't know. I love books signed by authors, and then I wonder why people want me to sign my books because I'm a nobody.
Yeah.
But I love books signed by authors.
You're not a nobody.
Your experience, Barbara, is incredible. I can't believe the amount of people the work you've done. Again, the metaphysical, the record keeping. The one thing I got to thank you for, and I think everyone else has to thank you for, is you're bringing this information to the world when it's needed. You've been groomed for this. You've been picked by your grandfather, by the other elders, by the shamans, and people may look at it, oh, it's such an elegant thing, but I know it's difficult. I'm sure you go against society. There are a lot of people don't like you bringing this out, and I'm sure that it's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it's easier now. In going back 25, 30 years, I was the person who was getting tomatoes thrown at me. And at this point, a lot of the things that I've gone into have now been explored by other people, and there's a real sense of colleagueship and growth in this work. Like I feel like you're another colleague, and so it's easier now. But of course, I'm going to be 70 on Valentine's Day this year, so I'm entering into that. Yeah, so I'm entering into that period of elderhood, which actually is very nice. It is more peaceful and it is calmer, and I'm actually enjoying it a great deal.
Oh, this is great. Now, do you have anything coming up you'd like to mention? Any talks or workshops or?
Actually, I'm not doing very much this year. I'm writing a novel, and I'm having so much fun because I'm being freed for a little while from footnotes and bibliographies, and you know what that stuff is like. And I'm taking a little bit of time for myself right now. My husband's career, Jerry's career, is very, very active right now. We kind of do that. I don't know if you do it with your partner, but we'll have a period where I kind of draw back and he does more, and then we reverse it. So I'm kind of in a quiet phase right now, which I'm enjoying a great deal. I am publishing articles on my website on all of the Uranus-Pluto squares, because the big astrological feature 2012 to 2015 is a series of squares between Uranus and Pluto. So I am putting articles on there about that and stuff, but that's about it right now.
Well, I tell you, I can't thank you enough for coming on tonight. I hope you come back again and do another hour. I mean, I started taking notes. I started after about 10 pages of notes. I stopped writing. I said, forget it. I just got to ask you what comes to mind because it's
I'd love to,
amount.
And especially I'd love to discuss alchemy with you because I'm just frustrated sometimes that I don't get a chance to talk to more physicists. So that'd be good.
Well, why don't we do that? Let's schedule, after I get the book and I finish reading it, why don't you come on back and we'll do an hour on alchemy. And I tell you, your books have been a blessing to me, I can't tell you. And Carl Johan Kalaman, who actually I read his work first and then I decided to read yours. They're just wonderful books. I 100% endorse and recommend them. They really are transforming. They really are spiritually transforming works. And well, what can I say? Barbara, thanks a million. God bless you and your family. And please come back again and keep me updated, okay?
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather. Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Welcome back, and my special guest tonight is Barbara Hand-Clow, and she is an internationally recognized Mayan elder, ceremonial teacher, and Cherokee record keeper. She is the author of over 10 books, including The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration, and Awakening of the World Mind, which is one of my favorite books of all times, Awakening the Planetary Mind, Beyond the Trauma of the Past to a New Era of Creativity, and The Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. She was the acquisition editor for Bear & Company, publishing from 1983 to 2000, and her website is handcloud2012.com, and it's linked up at the drjohnradiosite.com under her name. And I'd like to read a quote about her book from Whitley Strieber. Barbara Hand-Clow has written the definitive book about 2012. This book, quite simply, is the best resource that now exists. A very wise human being has poured her heart, her soul, and her mind into these words. The Mayan Code is a great gift to all of us, and I agree with Whitley. So I'd like to welcome my good friend, Barbara Hand-Clow, to the program. Hello, Barbara, and thanks a million for being with us tonight.
Hello, John, and thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I've been real excited to have you on. I don't want this to get to your head, but after Dan Brown, you may be my next favorite author.
That'll go to my head. Wouldn't we all like to have sales like that?
Yeah, I know. But maybe a good place to start. I know you'll be with us for an hour, and I really appreciate the time. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your Native American background, which always interests me? I know your grandfather was a big influence in your life.
Yeah, my grandfather really was my teacher, as well as my grandfather. What I call a still point. In other words, this evolutionary time acceleration pressure has completed itself, and we seem to be moving into it's very hard to explain what a still point is. It's like if you think of a pond, and you think of the very center of a series of waves where there's no motion and everything is extremely still. And I think this is very confusing for people. I know it's very confusing for me. I'm so used to the, kind of like trotting along in a horse and keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so used to that it feels very strange to have that energy go away.
I like the example of the pond. Could the still point be related to what people talk about the zero energy or the universal life force, or something that's just basic in nature that's pervading all matter?
Yeah, and I was lucky enough. My husband is a craniosacral therapist, which means he's working with manipulating the cranium and sacrum in order to work with energy. And he's in the middle of a 2-year course. He's already a trained therapist, but he's taking more training because the field is advancing so fast that even though he had this particular course 10 years ago, he actually is taking it again. And so I got to hang out with him for 5 or 6 days while he was taking this course, and I finally got in touch with what he was really doing. Now he's been doing this for 15 years, and I can assure you that I'm the kind of person who really pays attention to whether I understand what's going on around me. But as a result of him being in the course this time, I feel that I finally comprehend that still point. And what it is that we have these tides of energy flowing in the body that some craniosacral therapists call liquid light. And I actually wrote a book back in 1991 called Liquid Light of Sex. I actually started writing about this issue a long time ago. But I only can understand it now. And when we attain a still point, and when we reach that, which Carl Kalaman would say is enlightenment, then what happens, as far as I can tell, is multidimensional consciousness is fully available to us. When we're in that state of consciousness, we literally can reach any dimension of awareness. And in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, which first came out in 2004, and then I revised it in 2010, I said that when we got to the end of the Mayan calendar, October 28, 2011, that 9 dimensions of consciousness would become available to human beings. And as far as I can see, that's what's going on now. But it's so new and so confusing. And actually, it's actually very old, because as far as I can tell, when I go back into ancient people, Paleolithic people, say 15,000 years ago, as far as I can tell, they were conscious on all those levels. They weren't scientifically complex the way we are. Like one in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, the fourth dimension of consciousness is quantum mechanics. They didn't understand quantum mechanics the way we do in the current moment. But people like Laird Scranton have demonstrated that the ancient Egyptians understood quantum mechanics 5,000 years ago. So we're just reattaining this very, very high knowledge, and it really is confusing for people.
Is that why this opening of the 9 dimensions is why people are experiencing a spiritual awakening? I mean, the more people I talk to, even myself, there is a spiritual quickening that's been happening in the last couple of years, and it seems like realms are opening up. So is that why, do you think, people are able to is the veil becoming less, or is it just because of the acceleration of time that these dimensions are opening up?
Yeah, I think the acceleration of time by completing Kalaman, whom you had on the show a few weeks ago,
right,
has given me the chance to really recover that 100,000-year time data bank, which I think is extremely important to us right now, because I think we're only waking up at this point in time to levels of past wisdom pretty much 12,000 years ago and earlier. And I think the recovery of this early wisdom, which some people think of as Atlantis or many different names we could give to this level of consciousness and wisdom. And it is not a stretch to say that the planet is in very big trouble right now. And I think that the recovery of the ancient way of working with the planet and working with perceiving reality is already becoming increasingly important, and therefore any information that we have about the deep past is very important to us at this time.
Is there any specific information that would be good to share? I know in your book you have a lot of it, but would be good for the listeners to know. I know there's a lot of stress and anxiety about 2012, and so I'm wondering if some of that information is really related to our time now.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because it's the thing that I'm struggling with the most. And as a matter of fact, I was writing an article today that was directed right to that issue. So I do have some thoughts on that. And I think these thoughts are actually quite important. Now, as you know from interviewing Dr. Kalaman and reading his books and then reading the Mayan Code, as you know, Carl and I are working with a system of evolution over 16.4 billion years, which has been accelerating, especially during the last 300 years, and especially this last year. And as you know, as far as we can see, this particular part of our evolutionary process completed itself October 28th, 2011. And so the big question is, well, where are we now? And I have come to the conclusion that we are moving into, and Grandpa Hand was half Cherokee and half Scottish. And he was a record keeper, which means he had been brought, the wisdom of through time from the tribes have been brought through him. And then he trained me as his initiate. And this is an interesting thing that goes on in Cherokee tradition, because usually the teachings pass from a male teacher to a female teacher, and then a female teacher to a male teacher. And so in this case, my grandfather selected me as his granddaughter. But what is even more interesting to me is he passed it through his 5 children. And the reason he did that is that he did not feel that his 5 children, one of whom is my father, would be alive at this point in time, 2012. And of course, that's absolutely true. So he chose his granddaughter as his legacy, and that's the reason that I've brought this teaching to the planet.
Almost like he had the prophecy. He knew that was going to happen, and that's why he selected you. That's interesting. And what you're considered a Cherokee record keeper. Could you tell us what that is?
This means there are different traditions. There are medicine traditions where people teach ceremonial teachings, and of course I know how to do ceremony, but I'm not a ceremonial teacher for other people. And then we have herbal traditions, we have healing traditions, we have the full range of teachings within the Cherokee tradition, and the record keepers are the ones who carry the long records of time. And the records of time that we're working with actually go back at least 100,000 years. And it's been really interesting in this lifetime to gradually kind of put together a bunch of fragments that I received. The information that I received for the last 10 or 12,000 years was quite complete. But the information back like 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago was not that complete. And one of the big adventures in this lifetime, especially working with Dr. Johann